It's not like Jesus was struggling to be able to, it's not like he was popping pills trying to figure out how to get his anxiety under control. Jesus was, you could even make the case that Jesus drank wine, but he wasn't an addict. We see that through his character. He wasn't an addict. He didn't abuse sexuality. These are all things that we as a culture are struggling with, right? Every aspect of those things, we're struggling with those, as we saw in our first session, that those things are getting wildly more out of control. And with that, as Jesus has gone through all of those things, right? He's dealt with all of the things that we have dealt with. He's been tempted in every way that we have been tempted with. Why is it that Jesus doesn't have the same kind of problems that we do? Why is it that Jesus can go through everything that we've been tempted with and then have all the same struggles that we have, and yet doesn't struggle in the way of dealing with depression or dealing with anxiety? Why is Jesus not struggling with addictions, with an addictive personality? It's like we've got to figure that out some way. And the thing that's important about the verse in chapter 4, that Jesus is our great sympathizer. It's not like Jesus is looking down on us and saying, well, I did it, so get your act together, right? That's not the way Jesus is looking at us. And it's hard. Sometimes it feels that way, doesn't it? Sometimes it feels like maybe Jesus is sitting up there and saying, I'm so disappointed that you failed again, right? You messed up again, and we tend to throw that at ourselves when we mess up, when we get in our own problems and are stuck in our own ways. But the idea is that he's the sympathizer. He sympathizes with that, and that's an important thing, is that he feels the pain that we feel. The practice of counseling is so important because it's about having someone sit across from you and understand what it is you're struggling with. I mean, that's essentially the job of a counselor, is that they're able to sit there and say, man, I can get why you're going through this struggle. I can understand why this is painful for you. I can understand why you would turn to that, or why you would struggle. And they can understand it and then help you work through it. Well, there's no one who gets that better than Christ. There's no one who does it. That's what it says in chapter 4 here, is that he can sympathize with everything. And while we're struggling with whatever it is we're struggling with, whatever, we all have our, some people have it worse than others, and you can make all those comparisons. When we compare ourselves to Christ, we can say Jesus had it worse than we did. All right, let's just be honest. Jesus had it worse than we did in any respect as that goes. And when we talk about this idea of someone who can look at our problems and who can see our problems and understand it, he's a great understander of those things. And when he walks through it, he can say, yeah, I know why it's so hard for you. I get it. And imagine and just think about the implications of the God of the universe, your creator, who is able to look at you and say, man, I understand why it is you chose not to obey me. I understand why it is you chose to go the route I told you not to go in. And he can not only can he understand that, and he can sympathize with that, but then the one who gives us mercy, the one who gives us grace, is able to give it on the basis of, I understand why it is you didn't follow my commandments. I understand why it is that you struggled in this, that, or the other way. And that is vastly important when we talk about being on a good place of mental health, is that when we can sit across from God, when we can talk to God and say, God, I messed up yet again. I'm struggling with this. This is a hardship I'm going through, and I'm trying to do things the way you want. When we have a God who says, I understand, and I'm gonna carry you through this. I'm gonna give you what you lack. There's a God who understands what it is you lack. He understands what's missing because he understands what you're going through. And so we gotta, to get our minds around that and to be able to trust and turn to God in our struggles in that is so important on that. We talked about yesterday our responsibility to one another with bearing one another's burdens. And again, the one who can bear our burdens the best is Christ. We've got to be able to turn to him in that. So I want us to look at a few things when we look at why he doesn't have those problems, is that just like the things we talked about yesterday, the practices that we have, Jesus put those practices to the best practices. Blah, blah. Wow, I just lost that sentence. All right, so he put those practices to their best work in his own life. So look at Luke chapter 2, verse 49. Luke chapter 2, verse 49. All right. It says here that this is the story. Jesus is 12, right? He runs. He's lost. The parents are looking for him, and it said in verse 49, and he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" And so at 12 years old, he recognizes who his refuge is. The first place I'm going to go is to my Father. The place I'm going to take rest in. The place I'm going to find an escape in. The place I'm going to go first is my Father's house. That's an attitude that Christ had. And again, I think that served him all throughout his life. The idea that whenever I'm stuck, whenever I'm trapped, whenever I have no place to go, I can go to my Father's house. Whenever I need to figure something out, whenever I need to sort something out, I'm going to go to my Father. I'm going to work this out with him. And that was the attitude that he put in. And with that attitude of running to his Father to take refuge, is that he did that in practice throughout his ministry. Look at Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6. And verse 12, it says, "In these days he went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued to pray in God." The question is, why did he do that? Because he's about to choose his apostles. He's about to make a decision that's going to affect the whole of his ministry, right? It's going to affect who is going to be sitting with him, who's going to be walking with him, who's going to be learning from him, and who's going to carry on after he's gone. Because he knows how this works. He already knows what the plan is, and so he's picking out these 12 people, like who are going to be the ones who listen to me and follow me. And he's not making that decision, on the fly. He's not making that decision with his gut. He's making that decision with his Father. He's making important decisions with his Father. If we continue over to Matthew chapter 14, verse 23, and again, we're going to be doing a lot of Bible hopping today, so bear with me on that. Matthew chapter 14, verse 23, it says here that, "And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray, and when evening came, he was there alone." So again, after he's finished a very important part of his ministry, he's preached to the crowds, he's brought the message out that he's supposed to. He finds that time a way to escape, to take refuge in the Lord, to take refuge with his Father. If we go into Luke chapter 4:42, 4:42, it says, "And when it was day, he departed and went into a desolate place, and the people sought him, and he came to him, and he would have kept him from leaving them. But he said to them, I must preach the good news for the kingdom of God in other towns, as well as I have been sent for this purpose." But that initial, he went to a desolate place to pray. Same thing. After he finds himself in a moment of doing the work, after he finds himself in a moment of exhaustion, after he finds himself in a moment where I need some peace and quiet, his peace and quiet is with his Father. It's with God. It's not to say I need to just tune out and veg out and shut down. It's I need to be with my Father. That's a very different attitude than I think what mental health practices would tell us today is, man, find that time to be at peace with yourself, right? We talked about that with meditation, right? Center yourself and find that place within yourself. Jesus says, no, I'm not going to find this centering in myself. I'm not going to focus on me. I'm going to focus on my Father. And that was pretty apparent throughout his ministry. It's like, I'm doing what my Father has given me to do. I'm looking after that purpose. I'm keeping in tow with that by going back to him and returning back to him in order to be in line with that. I don't want to find myself out of line with the Father's will. And so he found every moment he could, he found those times to be back in that. And then look at Luke chapter 22, 39 through 46. This is in the garden. This is in the time of most distress. He's going to the garden to pray. And he says in verse 39 through 36, sorry, bear with me. It says, and he came out, and he went as was his custom to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and he prayed, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation. And this is such an important aspect when we're talking about Jesus and his anxiety and his dealing with mental health, right? I'm pretty sure he was pretty anxious right here, right? He was dealing with anxiety just like you and me. And I think this is an important point that we tend to gloss over, is that Jesus not only shed blood on the cross, he shed blood in the prevention of falling into temptation. In order to avoid temptation, in order to resist temptation, Jesus shed his blood to make sure he didn't do what his Father didn't want him to do. And he prayed earnestly, not my will, but yours be done. I actually had a conversation about this recently. I thought this was very interesting. I can't remember who it was I was talking to, but they were telling me about a friend of theirs, a relative of theirs, where they just got this idea in their head that if I am constant and consistent with my will, if I throw my will out there hard enough and fast enough, I can get my will done. And they were saying something like, if I want to get on this plane, or if I want this thing, or if I just throw that out hard enough, I will make my will happen. And that's kind of an idea that's out there. This idea of I can push my will, I can make my will happen, and I'm gonna be as persistent to make that happen. Well, look at Jesus. Jesus took the very opposite. I'm going to do everything to not do my will. I'm going to do everything to make sure my will doesn't happen and the Lord's will happens in its place. That God's will, my Father's will, is more important than mine. I'm going to do everything to make sure his will is accomplished. And again, to the point of shedding blood. How many of you have shed blood in order to refuse temptation? I know I haven't. I haven't gone that far. I should, maybe. I could. But again, and Jesus being our understander, right? Being the great understander, the great sympathizer, can look at us and say, you know what? Yeah, I've been there. I have shed my blood to make sure I didn't go against the Father's will. I understand why you haven't done that yet. I understand why that's a struggle for you. I understand why it's so hard to do not your will and to do God's will instead. I understand the hardship that is. He doesn't say, well, look what I did. You should be doing it too. He doesn't put us in that position. He understands the gap. And so when we look at that, again, we need to look at that not as Jesus pushing us down or talking down to us and saying, well, I did it, you did it too. We need to see that as, I did this so that I can give you the grace when you fall. I did this so that you can receive mercy from someone who understands the struggle. All right. The other thing is social connection. Right? We talked about how important that is, how important our relationships are when it comes to having mental health, having good mental health. Having good social connections, the first thing that happened that I want to look at is John chapter 4, verse 34. Because Jesus had social connection that went in different sects. Okay, so he had different level of social connection, and that's an important thing that if Jesus understood it this way, I think we need to take care to understand it this way as well. And so 4:34, it says that Jesus said to them, I'm sorry. No, okay. So first, let me come back to that for just a second. I want to make my point, and then I'll come back to that. It says that so Jesus had a relationship with the crowd. All right. So Jesus is constantly talking to crowds. He's talking to great multitudes of people. Right, 5,000, 4,000. Sermon on the Mount. Lots of people. Not a whole lot of personal interaction there. Right. Not a whole lot of I'm engaging with the person one on one. That I'm getting to interact with you. The thing about that, though, that we see is that he dismisses the crowds, and he does that personally. And who knows how long that took? Who knows how many people he talked to? But even when Jesus dismisses the crowds, and when he has those relationships with the crowds, I get the sense that there is a little bit more of an engagement beyond just the, hey, I'm up on a mountain, I'm preaching down to you. He got down in there and he talked with people on a more personal engagement. Particularly, we know he healed and he performed signs and miracles amongst those people. So he's getting down and he's doing the hard work on top of the big conversations that we see in Scripture. And as we see that, we also see that there was some fulfillment in doing that. So that's where John 4:34 comes in. It says, Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work." Now, this is after a one-on-one interaction, right? This is the woman at the well. But I get the sense that this is something that Jesus felt a lot when he was in his interactions, even amongst the crowds, is that there was some fulfillment in there of being able to engage, being able to do the work as it was given to him. We already know how in tune he was with God's will, that was an important factor for him. And there's some fulfillment in, I have done what has been set before me to do. I have engaged in what the Father has given me. And again, some satisfaction. I got to tell you, some satisfaction of, I don't need to eat, even though I was hungry, hours ago. I don't need to eat because I feel pretty good about what I've just done. And I don't know about you. I don't know that I could skip a meal because I've talked with you, but at the same time, he's showing us something about that fulfillment that goes beyond our physical understanding of things. Then there's the 72. So look at Luke chapter 10. So here we see that Jesus goes from having the crowds, the multitudes that follow him, to now he's got his 72 followers. He's got 72 who are following with him. It sounds like they're going from town to town, that they're being a little more engaged with whatever Jesus is doing. They're taking more time out of, they've devoted their lives to this as well. And so when Jesus, and we're going to go ahead and just read chapter 10 in a couple sections. It says in verse 1 through 12, it says, "After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them on ahead of him, 2 by 2 into every town and placed where he himself was about to go. And he said to them, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Go your way. Behold, I am sending you out as lambs in the midst of wolves. Carry no money bag, no knapsack, no sandals, and greet no one on the road. Whatever house you entered first, say, peace be to you in this house. And if a son of peace is there, your peace will rest upon him. But if not, it will return to you. And remain in the same house, eating and drinking that they provide. For the laborer deserves his wages. Do not go from house to house. Wherever you enter a town, and they receive you, eat what is set before you. Heal the sick in it, and say to them, the kingdom of God has come near to you. But whenever you enter a town, and they do not receive you, go into its streets and say, even the dust of the town that clings to your feet, we wipe off against you. Nevertheless, know this, that the kingdom of God has come near. I tell you, it will be more bearable on that day for Sodom than for that town.'" And I will say is that this is a grand example of discipleship. Jesus has 72 people who are following him, who are devoting their life to him. And when Jesus says, okay, I've got 72 people, I'm going to give you purpose. I'm going to give you work. I'm going to give you things to do. He sends them out 2 by 2. This tells me that as he's sending them out 2 by 2, it's not that Jesus is just saying, okay, you figure it out 2 by 2, go in. He's taking time and getting this invested in the fact that you're following me, and I'm invested in making sure that you have purpose and work while you're with me. What's more important is if we go down to 17, when they return, it says the 72 return with joy, saying, "Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name." And he said to them, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall hurt you. Nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven." This tells me that Jesus has some good relationship with the 72, because they're coming back to him all excited. They're coming back to him like, I can't wait to tell Jesus what happened. I can't wait to tell him, all the things we saw. And Jesus is excited with them. He says, that's exciting, but also be excited about this. That's exciting. I'm glad you saw, success, but also be excited about this. He still directs them. He still has that. But the relationship is there. There's this engagement that says, I care about you and you care about me, and we're going forward with this. That social interaction, that community is very, I think, a very good community. It's the community God calls us to, as we talked about more yesterday. And it's putting that into practice, and that there's value in that community, in that connection, and there's purpose. And that drew everybody to a greater understanding of what's going on there. Because Jesus is drawing them closer to say, no, I want you to understand what's really happening is that your name is written in heaven. I want you to understand what's really going on is that we are serving our spiritual purpose. We are serving that spiritual purpose, and it's succeeding. Right? We're serving that spiritual purpose, and we're accomplishing what's before us. I mean, there is no grander idea that I have purpose and I am accomplishing that purpose. That feels pretty good, right? That's a pretty good thing to be doing. When we talk about having good mental health and we talk about being purposeful, sometimes we can feel like we have purpose and we get disconcerted, we get discouraged because it doesn't feel like our purpose is being accomplished. I mean, how many of you have felt like that? I feel like I should be doing some work and it's not getting done, or it's not happening the way I want it to. Jesus is here saying, well, that spiritual purpose is being accomplished. Together we're doing it. All right. Then we go to the 12, because then we have the tighter knit of our 12. Look at Luke chapter 22. Luke chapter 22. And verse 15. Here it says, "And he said to them, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." And I think, again, this is an important point when it talks about the relationship that he has with the 12. That Jesus is desiring to do something with them. He's in his relationship with the 12. There's some intimacy that the 72 don't necessarily have. There's some intimacy that says, man, I have been waiting to do this. And we know what happened at that supper, right? There's some things that went down at that Last Supper where Jesus is preparing them, where Jesus is getting them ready, where he's setting them up, where he's showing them some more things, including washing their feet. And he says, I have been waiting to be able to put you guys in this room and get through these things and talk about these things. And we're going to really, I'm really going to set you up for it. Things are about to happen. Things are about to change and you don't even understand. And I want to prepare you. And so there is some intimacy in that. He taught them intimately, like I said, in John 13:14, when he washed their feet. And he says, as I do this for you, so you should also do it for each other. And so, like I said, there's that idea that he's purposing them, he's tasking them for that. Look at Luke chapter 6. In verse 13, it says, "And when day came, he called his disciples and chose from them 12 whom he named apostles." And I think, we pass over that, we gloss over that. Okay, he chose his 12 and he chose his apostles. But he prayed all night for these guys. He prayed all night for who he's going to choose. And then when he chose them, it says he called his 12 disciples and chose them whom he named apostles. And so he purposed them a little bit more so than the other disciples. This is to say, I've got these 72 people that are following me, but these 12 have some more purpose. And he's saying the connection here, the connection with these 12 that are going to be my apostles, and the apostles carried a greater weight in ministry, as we know scripturally, is that these are the guys I'm going to invest this level of spiritual investment, that our relationship is going to be more intimate, that they're going to see and understand this better. I want them to see and understand this better. Now then we also look at the 3. So look at Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9. So he has the 12, but then he has the 3, and it says in verse 2, 9 verse 2. It says, "And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them." And so he took the 3, Peter, James, and John. He put them, again, he's got the 12, and then he brings that to the 3, and he says that, okay, these guys are going to see some things that even the 12 don't. There's going to be, again, that more personal interaction. With that, we see in Luke chapter 8, verse. If we look at Matthew 26:37, again, these are the ones that he pulls farther into the garden. If you look at, verse 37, he says, "And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And he said to them, 'My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me.'" And so, again, this is the suggestion of Jesus is putting a burden on the 3 that he doesn't necessarily put on the 12. It doesn't mean he doesn't share with the 12 that he's having some trouble, because he's already told them to pray for him. But then he takes the 3 on and says, man, my struggle is real. My struggle is really, really hard. And so, why does he have more, why does he give more to the 3 than he does the 12? Right? And then we have the one whom Jesus loved, right? Turn to John chapter 13. John chapter 13, verse 23. It says, but beyond. I'm sorry, I'm in Mark. Be the right verse, right? Okay, John chapter 13. Bear with me. And verse 23. It says, one of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at table at Jesus' side. Now, we can always speculate that John gave this title to himself, but it's clear that John was more of an intimate relationship with Jesus than even the three. If we look on into John chapter 19, because I think this is a significant moment when it talks about the relationship, is that this is on the cross in verse 26. It says, when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, woman, behold your son. And then he said to the disciples, behold your mother. And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. And so this is the disciple. He said, I want you to be the one to take care of my mother. I can't take care of her anymore. I need you to do that. And so it shows there's some intimacy. There's some relying on one another in that way. Now, okay, so we've gone through this level, right? There's the levels of Jesus's relationship. And I will say this, I don't like it when someone takes this on and says, well, I need to have my 1 and my 3 and my 12 and my 72. Like, I don't think that's for us to necessarily model in that significant way. What it tells me is that Jesus understood the different levels of relationships with people. Is that Jesus understood that, I can have really good relationships with a crowd. I can have really good relationships with a vast number of followers, and I can be devoted to them. I can have good interconnection with them. I can give them purpose. But there's something more important about deeper connections, and that only happens with smaller groups of people. It's just the way that works. That's not to say that Jesus loved, any more these others than he did the 72, right? It doesn't mean he loved the 12 more than the 72 or the 3 more than the 12. The one says is the one whom he loved. I just think that's speaking about the intimacy of the relationship and the idea that we need more intimate relationships with one another. Okay, and that's the level that I would say is that we talk about that, and we look at our churches, and what's our Sunday morning? Our Sunday morning is the hey, how are you? And don't answer the how are you with anything more than I'm good, how are you? That's kind of the way we seem to interact with one another. And I think Jesus models with us is that that's not enough to get us through when we want to have spiritual success and when we want to have mental success. I don't think that it's enough to hold superficial relationships. The purpose going on in your life, and how are you fulfilling, what did you think of the message today, and tell me how you're going to put that into practice. I want to hear where you're successful in your ministries. I want to hear what's going on and what struggles you're having. But again, you've got to take that into, we don't always share that with everybody on Sunday, and that's okay, right? It's okay that we don't go to everybody and say, hey, I'm having a really tough time this week with my sin problem, da-da-da-da-da. We don't share that, in front of everybody. But we should have a group. We should have a number of people in our lives where we're making stronger connections, and we can say. I said yesterday as we talked about the cycle of addictions. And the way to get out of the cycle of addiction is to make different decisions in different stages of our addiction cycle. Is that we have to make a different plan on how I'm going to address this stage of that cycle. And the biggest thing to do is to talk to a person. Well, who is it that you're talking to if you don't have good, solid connections with people? If there's not someone that you trust enough to say, hey, this is an embarrassing problem, this is a hardship problem, I don't know how to deal with it, and I need someone to work with me through that. Jesus is telling us that is what needs to happen in order to maintain, in order to get through hardships. He modeled that for us by saying, in the garden, I am grieved to the point of death. I need you to pray for me in order that I don't run away from this that's coming at me, right? We admire Jesus for shedding his blood to the point that he resists sin, but we also forget he asked 3 people to pray for him and said, this struggle is hard for me. I need your help. I need you to walk with me in this, because if I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know that I'm going to make it. And so he models in that. I made the joke, and really truly that sometimes you just need to eat and you just need a nap, right? We talked about that yesterday. Well, Jesus did that too. Jesus ate and he slept. Look at Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4 and verse 38. It says in the make sure I'm in the right book. 4:38. There we go. All right. 38. It says, and he arose and he left the synagogue and he entered Simon's house. Now Simon's mother-in-law was ill with a high fever, and they appealed to him on her behalf. And he stood over her and rebuked the fever, and it left her. And immediately she rose and began to serve them. So, he heals Simon Peter's mother-in-law, and she immediately gives him a meal. And they what was that like sitting at the table? What was that like sitting there and being served by her whom he's just healed? I'm sure that was an enjoyable time. I'm sure there was some good conversation. There was some good fellowship. There was Jesus, enjoying and just getting to have a reprieve. I'm sitting down and having a meal with my disciples. Look at Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9 and verse 17. He's feeding the 5,000. It says, and they all ate and were satisfied, and what was left over was picked up by the 12 baskets of broken pieces. And so, I believe when it says they all ate, that means Jesus had a meal with this crowd that he just fed. Jesus sat down, and who knows the conversations that were going on there. I mean, did Jesus get up and go to different circles and speak with people and talk with people? Was he engaging that way? I believe he probably was. There was probably a level of that. And again, it's not just Jesus being a glutton and eating because we all need to eat sometimes. It's Jesus found purpose in the meals that he had. And I don't know. We don't know all the meals that Jesus ate. I mean, who knows how many meals he ate in 33 years? But we do know that when Jesus found those moments of eating and together, there was some together and purposeness. I got to believe that is a part of Jesus's walk on the daily. Not every one of them was feeding the 5,000, and there was great purpose in that. But I got to believe that as Jesus is walking through and he's sharing meals, that Jesus finds purpose in sitting down. He ate with the tax collectors and sinners, right? There's purpose in that. There is intent behind that. And so we got to believe that Jesus is doing that for a reason. Luke chapter 8, verse 23 also says, it talks about just the idea of getting a nap. It says, and as they sailed, he fell asleep. And a windstorm came on a lake, and they were filling with water and were in danger. And so I don't know about you, but I don't know that I could sleep through something like that. I mean, Jesus had to have been pretty tired to sleep through a storm on a boat while he's getting wet. And so it tells me that, Jesus tells me something about sleep, that maybe we don't need to sleep as much as we think we do. But when you sleep hard, right? Like you just, get that good sleep. Let that sleep come when it happens, All right, and so then the other thing is, I also want us to look at Paul for a second. Because while Jesus is our great example, right? Jesus is our great example in all these things. Paul also gives us this measure. Paul also, I love saying is that if ever there was a human that was not God, that understood what it was like to be like Christ, it's Paul. Paul understood that. And we're going to look back at Philippians. We looked at this closely yesterday, but let's look again at Philippians chapter 4. It says in verse 11, it says, not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound in any every circumstance. I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And we talked about the insignificance from this verse yesterday of being in gratitude, and how gratitude is a very healing factor for us who are struggling and seeking mental health. But it's, again, you got to look is that Paul puts that into practice with this. Paul's not just writing and saying, hey, be grateful. He's putting that into practice in his walk. And we know the hardships that Paul went through. He lists that out. It says, I'm dealing with this. I've dealt with that. I've dealt with these things. And for him to be able to say, but in that I can learn what it is to be content. I have learned what it is to face those things and still walk out being grateful. He's talking to the Philippians. When he was in Philippi and established the church there, he was arrested, he was beaten, and he was jailed. And what did he do? He was singing at midnight, being in jail and probably nursing some pretty severe wounds. And he's singing praises to God. It's like Paul put that into practice, what he preached. But if we go back a few steps, let's look back at Philippians in chapter 1, verse 21. 1 verse 21, it says, for to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. For if I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me, yet which I shall choose I cannot tell. I am hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and to be with Christ, for that is better for me. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you all for your progress and joy in the faith. And so with this, Paul also understands this idea of serving his purpose. He understands this idea of, okay, I have more to do here. And while I'm grateful for where I'm at, and I would long to be with Christ, right? He's saying, I would long to be with Christ. That's far better. I'd rather just be done and over with and receive my reward. But he's saying, I have a purpose here, and that is you. I have a purpose here, and that is to serve and make sure you're growing in the faith, because I don't want you to lose that out on that. And with that, he also says in chapter 3, verse 12 through 14, he says, not that I have already obtained this or am already perfect, but I press on to make it my own, because Christ Jesus has made me his own. Brothers, I do not consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. And as we talk about, this is him striving and serving his purpose. This is him also striving and saying, I still have more to develop here. I still have more that I have to get to, right? I still have to obtain to Christ, because I haven't been taken off this earth yet, but I still have to perfect in me. I still need to let Christ perfect in me what needs to be perfected. I haven't accomplished all yet. And for Paul to, again, I say the person who should have who understands it better than anyone, right? If it's anyone who understands how to be like Christ, it's Paul. And Paul here is saying, I still have work on me. I still have things to obtain to. Christ hasn't perfected everything in me either. And that goal of that idea, as I said yesterday, of learning new things and tasking ourselves to develop our faith as stronger, develop our faith more, like that's a purpose within us that we should be serving. And Paul is showing us that even when we reach a point where we think we've arrived, we haven't arrived yet. Like once you think you're there, that's when you're in trouble. You need to constantly be striving for, where is it now that Christ needs to perfect me? What is it now that God needs to fix or correct or grow? Like there's always something. And Paul shows that and demonstrates that. And so as when we look at all of, Christ and Paul's example, when we look at those and see that, he put all those things in practice, not only for his own benefit, not only was it so that Christ could get through this life and make it through and accomplish what God accomplished, which was to die on the cross for us. It's so that how we have this as an example to us. How is it that I can make it through? How is it that I can model that? Right? We're supposed to model Christ. We're supposed to be clothed in Christ and just as him. How are we supposed to walk in that way? If we're not looking to Christ and how he accomplished these things, if we're not looking at how Jesus set his life as an example, we're not going to obtain it. But to do so, to look at him more closely in that arena, I think, again, this is the resolution for our mental health. This is the resolution for us to be able to have better practice, better living, because if Jesus can go through all these things without these major issues that we're seeing in our culture, if Jesus can walk through and not have to struggle with depression and not have to struggle with anxiety or with all these other addictions or all these other mental health problems, if Jesus is able to accomplish that, then that means that there's something to his model that tells me there's some success there. There's something to his model that tells me that I can do the same.
Yes.
That gives me some hope. That should give me some hope. I can do what Jesus did. Even if I don't do it perfectly, I have someone who sympathizes when I don't do it perfectly. But I can do what he did. He's given that to me to show me that it's possible. So that's that. So I do want to take your questions this morning if you have any. Not as many as the last couple of days, I guess. Yes, ma'am.
So we know that Paul had difficulties because he had a thing where he went to God several times.
Yes.
Until he figured out, listen, this is a thing and it's not going anywhere. And Jesus, I can't even begin to imagine what he was going through.
Mm-hmm.
Not only at the time of his death, but his whole life. because that was the combination. He would go to the that had to have brought a lot of stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
Because when we have a little something to do, when I have a little something to do, sometimes I can be up at night, just knowing I have this difficult thing to do. So like you were saying, it's a process. We have to identify with what we're going through.
Yes.
I think what happens, I'm thinking for myself, what happens is we don't call it by its name. This is what I'm going through, this is what I'm feeling. But what we do and what we encourage others to do is, pray about it.
Yes.
Don't talk about it. Brother, I'm feeling anxious. Go in your faith, talk to God. I think we have it upside down. I've gone through all of my life having it upside down. We need to express what we're feeling, so we can then deal with it. That which a person does not acknowledge, and, or doesn't accept, we can fix or change.
Yeah.
I think it's time for us to be transparent, with ourselves, with each other, and not be so afraid. Christians are the most afraid people I know.
Yeah.
And I talk to people about my difficulties because I want a response.
Yeah.
But they're so afraid to deal with it, so we have to understand these things are gonna happen to us. We're gonna feel these anxieties and stuff, but we know we have tools.
Yes.
We have the tools to deal with it. It's okay to feel all these things because we're human beings, but we have the tools, and this is what your class means to me. You've said things to me, I've heard all of my Christianity, but it made sense for the last 3 years. I'm telling you, there was a clarity that came with it because I understood what was happening, and I really want to thank you for that, for helping me to see clearly the tools that was already there, but I didn't know how to access the tools, how to use the tools. So I appreciate it very much.
Well, you honor me to say that. I really appreciate that, and that was the goal, is to make sure we know we have the tools at hand. You say I think you said well, is the idea of we need to go to God first with these things. The idea that we're not going to God and bearing this all before Him. We look at Paul's whole problem with the thorn in his flesh. His first thing is to go to God in that. And then when he gets his response from God, he's accepting of that response. He accepts, okay, this is what God has told me. And I'm going to use that, right, to model to the rest of you, this is how you deal with those struggles. And so, absolutely. And then God gives us the tools in that. I mean, God's response to that is, my grace is sufficient for you. And he then goes on to tell Timothy that be strengthened by that grace. Be strengthened by the grace that God supplies, because God says that's sufficient for you. And so if we can go in our struggles and say, okay, God, I'm going to lay this out before you. I am struggling with this. I am having a hard time with whatever it is. And then we can hear God say, well, my grace is sufficient in you. When God says something like, I'm not going to remove the thorn, right, because my grace is sufficient for you, then that's saying God's telling you can handle it.
Yes.
God's telling you you're capable. And it's like, people, I don't think we hear that as often today, is this idea, you're capable. You can manage this. But we can only manage this with a relationship with God. We can only manage this with a strong relationship with the Father. On top of that, when I talk about our responsibility to each other in that, if I'm supposed to be Christ, right? If I'm supposed to be His representative on earth, then that means I'm His tool, and so that means I'm His tool for you, and your tools for each other. We are resources for one another in those struggles, and so we can't discount that. We can't discount our relationship with God. We can't discount that needs to be our number one, our first place to go. But then we also need to be able to be resources for one another. And I think, as you're saying, we have those tools. If the Bible gives us tools, and we need to be able to see it as that we have the ability to handle these issues with one another. We can't be afraid to walk with people in those kinds of struggles. And again, my whole goal for this was to make sure that people heard and see that you guys have more capability of walking with people who are going through mental health issues than we realize, I think, sometimes. And I think, that whole conversation seems to be making it into some sort of monstrosity that only counselors and psychiatrists and only medication can solve. And I just think that's not true. I mean, I'm not saying that those aren't helpful tools and those aren't things to look at. And if you need a counselor, talk to a counselor. But don't think that you can't handle this issue as we see it in our churches today, and as we see it within the communities and out to the people we're reaching. We have greater ability for mental health than we realize. Go ahead, John.
Does anybody else have a comment? I got this scripture I wanted to share, if you don't mind. It's Mark 5, and I think it applies. They came to the other side of the sea, the country of the Gerasenes. When they got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. This is chapter 5 of Mark. And his dwelling was in the tombs, so he slept inside the tombs because they're above ground tombs. And he was able, no one was able to bind him anymore, and even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and he tore them apart by the shackles and broke them into pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. Constantly, day and night, he was screaming among the tombs and the mountains, gashing himself with stones. Seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran out and bowed down before him. So they'd just gotten off the boat. They'd almost crashed in the boat because Jesus was asleep in the boat. They weren't ready for this. They weren't prepared. Nobody was. Seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him, shouting with a loud voice. He said, "What business do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High? I implore you by God, do not torment me." For he had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And he was asking him, "What is your name?" And he said, "My name is Legion." That's a large group of soldiers in a Roman army.
Mm-hmm.
For we are many. And he began to implore him earnestly not to send him into the country. And there was a large herd of swine nearby on the mountain, and so about 3,000 pigs. And the demons implored him, saying, "Send us into the swine, the pigs, so that we may enter them." Jesus gave permission, and the coming out of him, the unclean spirits entered the swine, and the herd rushed out. So it'd be like in Seattle, or a steep bank or a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
They ran off and they all died in the ocean. And about 2,000 of them, so it wasn't 3,000, 2,000 of them were drowned in the sea. Their herdsmen ran away, so there was this free-range pig, not in pens. And they reported in the city and the country, and the people came to see what had happened. They came and observed the man who had been possessed, sitting, clothed in his right mind. The very man that had the legion, they became frightened. And those who had described to them how it happened, the demon-possessed, and about all the swine. And they began to implore him to leave the region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed was imploring him that he might accompany him. He says, "Do not let him," but he said, "Go home. Tell your people. Report to them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he had mercy on you." And he went away and proclaimed in Decapolis what great things Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. And then later on, they asked him to leave. But what I'm trying to say is, we're not just trying to help the mentally disabled, okay, or help the person that has done things to his mind and to his brain. They are going to be our evangelists. And later on, a lot of the people that came to listen to Jesus had listened to that man,
Mm-hmm.
who was an evangelist, in a sense, for Jesus Christ. So we're not just trying to get them up on their feet and get them a job. We're trying to get them to proclaim to people what Jesus can do for them. And this is the model, and it sounds neat. It sounds great. And I talked about Deborah. We have an elder from Wittenville. He's an elder at Springbrook now, Royce Jackson. But she got on her feet. She was our main evangelist for all these homeless people. Okay, it's very tough work. It's not. I don't want an idealistic thing. They take a lot of work, and they're a real pain in the neck. I don't want to be, but if you do get them on their feet, it is a real testimony to Jesus Christ.
Well, I mean, absolutely, but I mean that's anybody. I mean, anyone should be an evangelist when they realize what Christ has done for them. I mean, sometimes we do we do forget that what Christ has done for us. And absolutely, someone who can get over mental illness because of what principles Christ lays down should be a testament to that what he gives us is solid in this. Rachel, yeah.
I was thinking about, helping people with mental health in church, being in ministry and stuff.
Mhm.
And we've been coming across it a lot. What do you do in a circumstance where, you just feel like you're being sucked dry? Because a lot of times these people are needy, and even when you share with someone or something to minister to this person,
Sure.
sometimes I have just, then you find yourself avoiding these people, or,
Yeah.
I mean, what do you do?
That is a case for boundaries. Boundaries is a very important. I mean, when we're talking about, and that's a whole other series in itself, being in boundaries. But yeah, you do have to have boundaries in that. It's drowning man. You don't. A drowning man will kill you. It will drown you too if you're not equipped.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? If you don't know how to handle what's going on in their world, like if you don't have that. That understanding of, hey, I might have to punch you in the face, to be able to get you ready to be saved, and so there is this idea that if I'm going to help a drowning person, which is really the right analogy, then I need to know when I need to say, hey,
Yeah.
it's you, it's either you drown or we both drown, and it's not going to be we both drown. It's not going to be both of us. So I will save you if you will let me, but otherwise I'm going to let you go, and that was your decision. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a comment about someone with a mental health issue. And someone actually asked me this where we had been going, and there's been a sermon on joy, and she suffers from depression. And she said when she hears a sermon like that, it makes her feel like she's not a good Christian because she's not joyful.
Sure.
And I think we need to be careful as a church that we put the mental health issue with their Christianity. Because the mental health issue, that is it's like if someone came into church and they were in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
We wouldn't say, oh, that person is not a good Christian, or they're someone that's going to just be a labor for us. But someone with a mental health issue is suffering from something as it's physical too.
Yeah.
And we want to recognize that just because they're suffering from this, that doesn't mean they're not searching for Jesus, or they're not trying, or they don't even have things to bring to our church.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's definitely, you're absolutely right. Like, being depressed or being anxious is not a sin inherently, right? I mean, Christ tells us not to be anxious, right? But he gives us the solution to that.
Yeah.
He gives us the solution to how to deal with our anxiety. And when we're calling people in to better mental health as Christians, we're talking about a solution here. We're talking about how can we get you to the place you need to be. And it's not to say that because you feel this way, you are sinful, and because you don't feel that way, you are sinful. It's just, let's get you to the place where you need to be. Christ has solutions for whatever ails you, whatever your struggles are. Christ has the solutions to that, even to mental health. Yes, ma'am.
We think about mental health to the extreme, but I guarantee you, a lot of us in here, we are unhealthy mentally because we have been through some form of trauma that we have not addressed. Divorce, abuse, so many things we deal with. I mean, we put it under the covers, and it keep regurgitating itself, and we don't know what it is, but we're faithful, right? We worshiping,
right?
We still take care of our families, but that thing keeps coming up because we haven't attended to it. We have been scarred from our childhood, bad relationships, bad decisions, life will scar us in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And because we don't talk about it, we don't address it, and we think we're healthy.
Yeah.
We're looking at the other guy there who, like the brother read, he's really crazy. But we don't know why he got like that point.
Yeah.
Maybe he had a bad experience. Maybe his wife may have left him. Maybe we don't know, right?
Mhm.
A lot of us are walking around here because we are bruised.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are bruised. We are hurting. Nobody seems to be seeing that we are struggling because we have gotten so good in pretending,
Yeah.
in acting, because that's what we know to do, and we are in the environment that only allows us to do that.
Yeah. Well, and the idea
Yeah.
is being in Christ is supposed to shed light on all things,
That's
right? If he's
amen.
shedding light on all things,
Amen.
then yeah, we do need to expose those
Yeah.
things.
So you have given us lovely examples of Jesus in service to others.
Mhm.
And of all people, he was most scarred, he was most wounded, he was most insulted, and so forth.
Mhm.
But did he not exemplify perfect mental health by serving others,
Yes.
absorbing himself into the life of others, and
Absolutely.
thereby fully fulfilled?
Absolutely.
Very good. Very
And I think that's where, like, when we were talking about his social,
Yeah.
what he was doing on the social connection, right? Mental health would tell us you need to have a good social,
Right.
social community and some sort.
Yes.
Jesus is, we're going beyond social to we're going to purpose.
Yeah.
I have a purpose in serving you. I have a purpose, and we're going to draw to our spiritual work that God is giving us. And I not only am going to do that myself, I'm going to bring you along for the ride. I'm going to bring you along with that. I'm going to purpose you and discipleship. Discipleship is such an important thing to that because it goes beyond just the I want to get you in here and you're just now a part of the conglomerate. I want to see you in your life. I want to see where you're serving that purpose. I want to make sure you're getting into the right direction of serving that purpose. And that's absolutely, and we are all out of time, but
I just want to say one more thing. I want to bounce off what she said real quick. I don't want to, but you need about 8 people to work with one homeless person. And if it's a woman, 8 women. If it's a man, 8 men. You can't do it by yourself. And then a lot of people in the church don't want to help you.
Well,
that's just practical. So so that's what you need to do. Don't let them drain you. You have your own family to take care of. You have the church to take care of. And all the little kids that are running around the church you need to take care of too.
Well,
so if you're going to work with them, that's just my opinion.
Well, I do want to end by just saying thank you to everyone for being here for the last 3 days. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your questions. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback.
You did a good job.
I'm grateful that this had any kind of impact on you whatsoever. And with that, I do want to just put out there is I do serve a small practice in Kellar. If you guys ever need anything help, if you know anyone that just needs help, I serve in that capacity. I do counseling. That if you are interested or know someone who needs it, I'm more than happy to take on anybody if you want to talk. Just reach out to me and we can have those conversations on a more extensive basis if you need it. But again, thank you so much, and you guys have a wonderful day and last day of the Faith Builders.
Thank you.